We are here for a work session on AO 2023-59, which is ordinance addressing costs related to the Chugach Access Capital Improvements, the Chugach State Park Access Service Area. And I have not been involved with the planning of this work session, so I'm not sure who has the lead on this and who's really willing to organize the conversation. Before that, Randy isn't here, interestingly. We should do our introductions. Mr. Rivera.
Felix Rivera.
Zach Johnson.
Karen Bronga.
Daniel Voland.
Christopher Constant on the phone. Mr. Myers.
Yes, I am here.
All right, thank you. Mr. Salt, are you on the phone? Okay, so let me see if I had any notes from him.
I was saying, and I could go check my email, but Claire, you might know, I believe Member Salt had prepared a presentation for this work session, yes?
Yeah. Would you
That
like
was,
to give it?
I mean, we could pull it up and I could stumble my way through it as best I could, but
Because Jennifer gave them an edit. We can get the final. But I'll give you what I have.
All right.
Just 1 minute.
I will say I don't feel prepared to really offer a whole lot here, but
It's a good one.
So actually, here's the thing. We have Bill Falsey in the room, and he's been in the conversation. So if worse came to worse, I could always just pivot to him. But
I didn't want to throw Bill under the bus, but he probably knows more about what's going on here. So if he'd like to take lead, I would invite him, but I'm not going to.
Hold on, Mr. Salt is tuning in.
I
Hi there.
made it.
Thanks, Randy. We were just discussing how we're going to proceed with the work session, and because I didn't get a briefing on how anybody wanted to go forward with this, and so I don't have a work plan for this hour. And I assumed that one of you would, and we're pivoting to you if you have a plan, Mr. Salt. We do have a plan B if you don't.
Yeah. Do we have the presentation I sent in, or the
It'll be up on the screen in just 1 minute.
Okay, that'd be great.
And Ms. Ross, is it the same one that you said wasn't final, or is this the final one that Mr. Salt sent back?
It just had a one word.
Okay, this one's real close. So this one is close, but maybe not the final version. That said, it's coming up on the screen. I think any second. Okay, so we're just having a little IT issue. Randy, why don't, before we get the slide deck up, why don't you just give us a quick 2-minute preamble why we're here today?
Okay, let me just take a minute here on the computer. Sorry about this. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So essentially, this was passed, introduced a while back, and we had some pieces that we had to follow up, such as the projects, whether there'd be operation and maintenance funding, whether we could spend funds within the park, and just finalize those items. So I don't expect a whole lot of questions. I just want to update everyone on where this is at before we introduce it, I believe, on the 10th.
Yeah, it's a little bit hard to understand you, Randy, but I think I heard you just essentially that we're going to have a brief introduction in a minute. So I'm not sure what's happening with the presentation, but
Yeah, let me know. I can start walking through. I can start walking through it without the presentation up, but let me know when it does come up. So essentially, the purpose, and I'm getting an echo, by the way, as well.
check and see if that's better.
Okay, that is better. Thank you. So the purpose is to essentially, when we construct the Chugach, the CASA service area, is to provide funding for the road service areas that experience heavy traffic use going to the park, yet the road service areas themselves are rather small and unable to support that volume of traffic and road maintenance. So it's designed as to spread the burden across the municipality in the Chugach State Park service area.
All right,
So
we
the
have,
next
we have the
step-
slide show up.
Okay. Let me just get a setting here. Okay, go ahead and go to the next slide.
We're there.
And I
on the
should have covered
purpose.
Yeah. Okay, so we covered the purpose. So go to the next slide after that.
We're there.
Okay, great. This slide just shows on the left the Chugach State Park boundary, and then on the right it shows the affected limited road service areas and road service areas that you can see listed there in the middle of the slide. So go ahead and go to the next slide.
We're there.
Okay, now this slide talks about essentially some of the AO details. So in order to get approval, we have to have the majority of the voters of those within muni-wide as well as those within the service area. No bonding will be spent on maintenance items. And I believe Joe Conley and Roger Marks might be there and they can follow up that they don't expect there to be any increased operations or maintenance costs for these projects. The second part was no bond funds will be spent within the Chugach State Park. And for now, there was only one project which we were going to pull off the list till we get that resolved at a later date. And the options for resolving it are the areas could be turned over or leased to municipality. So we would essentially own them. We could remove the project from the list. We could also seek to have the state fund equal projects or fund those projects and operate them from their side of the table, which is probably the option that I like the best. Keeps the burden in the park and just has the state match those projects. And I guess Zach, are Roger and Joe there by chance?
They are. As well as Bill.
Okay, I don't know if they want to come up and just speak to the next slide, which I believe is the project list.
All right, gentlemen, you have a microphone in front of you. Just say your name for the record and turn it on so the green light's on. There you go. So I think maybe the next, there we go.
Yeah, I'm Roger Marks with Glen Alps Road Service Area. We reached, once after this passed last April, the creation of the service area, we reached out to all the service areas that have road corridors that go to Chugach State Park and may be affected to see their interest in receiving funding from this initiative. the way the ordinance is written, the local community, the road service areas have to sort of buy in, they have to want it, so it can't, so projects aren't sort of stuffed down their throat that the people don't want. So we reached out to all the areas, all the service areas that have road corridors, and there were 4 road service areas up there that expressed an interest in receiving funding. Glen Alps Road Service Areas, $4 million for Upper DeArmond Road and $4 million for Canyon Road. I would be hard pressed to find a worse road in the entire municipality than Canyon Road. If anyone tries hike to Rabbit Lakes or the sunny side of Flattop, that road is atrocious. And the next most atrocious road is Upper DeArmond that leads to it. Then the Campbell Airstrip road service area, the one that goes, Basher Road, Stuckagon Heights, they requested money for design of additional parking lot next to the Basher Trailhead on municipal land. And they requested rerouting of parts of that road that are near Campbell Creek and get flooded and glaciated in the winter, and a design study for that. And then they requested funds for road improvements, potholes and frost heaving on the lower section of that road. Bear Valley, the road that goes to, some of you are familiar with it, the Grandview Trailhead, which at the end of Honey Bear Lane. Right now, Bear Valley starts at the end of Clark's Road. Clark's Road's in good shape, but Bear Valley, Kingsway, Black Bear, and Snow Bear, and beginning of Honey Bear are pretty rough gravel roads. They requested $300,000 for RAP and CS1 oil to improve that. And the Upper O'Malley Limited Road Service Area requested $243,000 for some repaving on Upper O'Malley Road. We reached out to some areas that weren't interested in receiving funding. Rabbit Creek, Clark's Road that feeds into Bear Valley is in good shape. They weren't interested. The Golden View Service Area, which includes the Stewart Trail, about interest in parking enhancements for the Stewart Trail. Evidently, many of the neighbors here were not interested in having parking improvements. And then at the very end of Honey Bear Lane, that leads again up to that Grandview Trailhead. That's a private homeowner association road, and they were not interested in receiving any money. So with this, we believe we've done an exhaustive reaching out to all the effective road service areas that have corridors that go to Chugach State Park. We spent quite a bit of time with a lot of people discussing what we think would be a bond package that could pass, and a lot of people think 10 million would work. Big enough to do a good job and not too big to hopefully not too big that it would not be voted in.
So I think there are a number of questions, but they might first be questions for legal analysis. My first question is, we had a presentation part that said it's a dual yes vote, but it isn't a dual yes vote of the road service areas, right? It's a dual yes vote of the CASA service area and then the muni, right? So I just want everyone to understand it isn't like that the road service areas get a veto by ballot. They can advocate, support, oppose, but they don't have that dual vote authority. Mr. Bond?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate you bringing that up. I think I'm a little bit concerned about the initial framing of this. When you say, the folks in the area of the Stewart Trail aren't interested. I have reservations, concerns about that type of framing, just because when I supported putting this on the ballot, for me, it was all about what's in the public interest, or the wider public interest, and all about public access to trails. And so I don't want us to be in the position of asking permission from local homeowners about creating that access. I would like more people to be able to use the Stewart Trail. In fact, I was on it a week ago. And I think especially with what we saw with the Friends of the Stewart Trail and having to, go to litigation to get access to that trail, there's on those streets no parking signs all along that street. And I think that that's problematic and really concerning. And so that's like one thing I want to put a flag in. And then the other thing is, I don't know if I can support this list of projects as it currently exists, because to me, this is all just about road upgrades in South Anchorage. This is not trailhead amenities. And when we passed this and put it on the ballot, it was supposed to be sort of a wider, range of improvements that would serve the public. We talked on the dais about things like public restrooms. We talked about, maybe new trailheads or trailhead upgrades. And so I don't know. I think this needs to be a little bit more balanced between those various amenities and not simply focus on roads. The only thing that I really see that creates better access is maybe the overflow parking for the Basher Trailhead, but that's just kind of my initial impressions. Thank you.
All right.
Chair Costa, can I respond to that?
Sure. Go ahead, Mr. Salt.
So I seem to remember when we debated this on the dais that we steered clear of improving trail access, and we stuck with maintaining road access to the parks. We didn't want to create new access points, only maintain or improve the one.
So I think that's incorrect. I think we actually amended it. And that was something that I kind of fought to get in there, was that it could be for trailhead access. But we can look back at the record.
Yeah. So I have a couple people.
Yeah, we can certainly accept an amendment. But
Randy, hold on. Go ahead.
So Joe Conley, Glen Elks Road Service Area. As Randy mentioned in one of the previous slides, and as a reminder, we cannot spend bond money on park facilities right now. So this money can be spent on road access, road improvements, but we can't build a parking lot or a toilet or an interpretive sign with the money. However, Chugach State Park can, and they are working right now to secure funding for Canyon Road specifically to put in a parking lot back there. Was it $3 million that I think they were granted $3 million through some federal program. I'm not sure. I don't want to get into the details because I don't know exactly what they are, but they have secured money to do a parking lot at the end of Canyon Road. So if we don't put in a road, they're going to have this beautiful parking lot back there with no beautiful road. But we can't take the bond money and build the parking lot for them. They have to do it. But if we build it, then hopefully they will come.
So I think that there is a legal discussion to be had here on this topic that is probably germane before, but we have a lot of people in the queue. And I think there's evidence that the Chugach State Park will accept municipal money for projects. And so, but I'll put myself in the queue for that. So I'm going to walk through the queue that I have. I'm going to ask you to hold Mr. Bond, and then we'll go to both Mr. Gates and Mr. Falsey to provide us some legal perspective. So first, Ms. Braga.
So Mr. Volan named one of the projects I'm most concerned about. I went to hike the Stewart Mountain Trail, and there is literally no place to park. There's just no parking signs all over the road in that whole area. There's still a gate blocking the trail. There's still an ominous sign that says you can't go here. And, it's not, that's something that I was hoping this was going to address. I am happy with the Basher increase of traffic. And I do think the engineering to relocate away from the stream, they're hoping to have a trail next to Campbell Airstrip Road. A lot of people roller ski up and down the road, and there's a pedestrian lane at the first mile. So this rerouting, I think they intend to put a trail next to the road a little further up, which would be fabulous. But Bear Valley is another one. When you try to hike McHugh Trail, there's 4 parking spaces or something, and then you have to park a mile down the road or something to start your hike. So I understand that you're saying that the state parks we can't pay for the parking on those, but then it begs the question that what is this really doing to enhance hiking? Because if we drive up there and we can't park, then that's a huge issue. And so, maybe it's looking at other forms of transportation to shuttle people to the trailheads, but I can picture like going to Glen Alps. It's hard to get parking, even with all their expansion of parking at Glen Alps. On a nice day, you got to get out there early. Perhaps we need to start looking into a shuttle service to get people to the trailheads, which would reduce the number of people trying to drive to them, which might help solve our problem.
Yeah, the neighbors will love that traffic. So, Mr. Johnson. Okay, and I want to raise a concern that I have just looking at this. And I recognize the Canyon Road is a unique conversation, but these are all road projects that if they were to proceed in any other universe would be paid for by the people who generally use them every day. And talking about the access to the Stewart Trail, they've done everything they can to make it so nobody can have access there, make it threatening, put up barbed wire, put up cameras and threaten litigation. I've been a subject to that with the late Chris Birch. We received threats. And so if this is simply a replacement program for road service areas to fund their road projects, it certainly argues against the effort. And I want to say that when we had the first round of ARPA, we funded the construction of the Hemlock Burn Trail in the Chugach State Park. And so I am aware very much that the Muni has a history of paying for amenities and improvements within the Chugach State Park. So any argument that they won't is an argument of reticence and will, not an argument of fact and reality. There has to be a way. I understand that's not your two problem. That is a bigger problem. That's the Muni's problem to figure out the mechanics of it. So last, I'll go back to Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, thank you. I would just say quickly, in terms of not to advocate specifically for one project here, but if we're talking about Canyon Road, I'm not an expert on roads and road upkeep and maintenance, but I would think it's safe to say that if that used road were only being utilized by the people who live in that neighborhood and pay into the LRSA, that it would be in much, much better condition than it is. I think probably in the summer, I don't know. I mean, this is just kind of pulling a number out of thin air, but I would guess at least half, 3/4, maybe even 90% of the cars traveling on that road are not residents. So I think it's fair to say that they're being impacted by people outside of the LRSA, and they simply lack the capacity to maintain that road with the resources they have.
Yeah, and I think the argument there is what Mr. Vollen said. There has to be a balance, right? There has to be. Otherwise, it literally just becomes a LRSA funding replacement project so they can have their money to do other things. And so I'm not sure what the balance is. Mr. Salt.
Thanks. I just wanted to state that the money that is for these projects is not necessarily solely for these projects. So these projects prove to be unfeasible or funded through other means. They can, Public Works can then use that money for other projects that are deemed suitable going forward. Also, we're still working on, I had some feedback. Do we want to request the full 10 million? Or for the two larger projects, do more of a phased approach, which that first request would be for engineering and design, so a much smaller amount to build a better bid package to go forward that would then complete the project, so that you may see an amendment or an S version that could cut the amounts way back. And again, if there's other projects that we want to list, we're happy to put them in there. But again, Public Works can use this for not just these projects that are listed, but other projects that fit what the AO suggests within CASA. Thank you.
So Mr. Gates and then Mr. Falsey, and then we'll come back to Mr. Connolly.
Thank you. I just wanted to speak to Mr. Chair, your comment earlier about the dual vote, and what you said was correct. I might have missed the first part, But we're correct that there's no dual vote approval requirement for the limited road service areas to approve. The CASA service area needs to approve, but there is a dual vote requirement for all of our bonds, and that's for the area wide. We need to approve to provide the municipalities full faith and credit for the bonds. So the dual vote requirement, I mean, you'll hear the term thrown out. That's for the service area, which is CASA plus the area wide approval. And I just wanted to make sure that was clarified.
Mr. Falsey.
And tagging on to that, Bill Falsey, outside counsel for the Assembly, a couple items. The first is, that's absolutely right. So as Dean described, there is the dual vote for full faith and credit being pledged. I will remind you that in the animating ordinance, the authorizing ordinance that goes before this bond proposition, we did say that if there was a road project that was in a limited road service area, that the board of the limited road service area would agree to it. So that, I think, speaks to the need for the coordination that Roger was talking about before. So there isn't like a veto that happens at a balloting stage, but there is a coordination that happens about road projects in the area. Beyond that, reminding us where we are sort of in the process here. So we got voters to say, yes, we will create this Chugach access service area, and that opens the field of play for what do we want to do with it. This first one is a bond proposition. And we knew, as we talked about in the last work session before we went to voters to create the Chugach access service area, that building things in the park was a little bit trickier. And we heard from Ricky Geist at the time saying, well, we're limited on the kinds of arrangements that we can enter into. And if I were channeling bond counsel here, I think she would say, if the municipality bonds to build a capital project, it has to own the capital project for the life of the capital project. And so that would mean you'd have to have some kind of property interest in the park. And I think that is still potentially possible, but I will confess to the Assembly that that conversation hasn't really moved very far. We're still trying to make it get off the dime, meaning maybe there's a long-term lease, maybe there's a concession, maybe there's some kind of long-term easement. We're trying to figure that out, and that may or may not unlock the bonding capability. The other alternative, though, is the CASA itself could just do a tax levy in which it could say there is a thing that we would like to see within the park boundaries. And if the state agreed that that thing should be there, like the trail that the chair was describing, the municipality could raise just dollars, not bond dollars, and hand it over to the state or enter into some kind of agreement. Either way, improvements in the park are going to require the state to be at the table coordinating with us and ultimately agreeing with whatever we're doing. And that conversation just hasn't gotten very far yet. And so I think what you're seeing here is a lot of these projects that are listed on the board now are sort of easy to do because the municipality completely controls them, and maybe foundational to a lot of those other projects. So you're not going to potentially do a whole lot of improvements at the end of Canyon Road before Canyon Road is actually fixed. But I'll say that that conversation legally is still a work in progress. I think we're still trying to figure out how to unlock the rest of the promise of the service area.
All right, Mr. Connolly.
Thanks. Joe Conley, Glen Alps Road Service Area again. So I'd just like to ask the folks who are unhappy with the Stewart Homestead Trail issue to not give up on everything else just because of Stewart Homestead Trail not being the ideal solution in this current form. I think rather than saying no to everything, saying yes to what we have now and then trying to find a more creative solution for Stewart Homestead Trail would be a better path forward. For example, and I don't know if it's possible, but if in the current footprint of the area where people are parking right now for Stewart Homestead Trail, there's no legal right-of-way or there's no actual space for public parking, why don't we look at some of the vacant land just beyond the gate? Because I think some of it's for sale. Purchase that through CASA and create a municipal parking lot. And then it doesn't have anything to do with Chugach State Park directly, but indirectly it would. And we haven't explored that in too much detail, but I think we could do that. And that's what I would propose doing if we can't actually put parking in the current footprint of that kind of turnaround there at the end of the road. Because if we can't, we can't. So we could almost say that the preferences of the service area back there don't really matter if the municipality buys land just beyond that, because it's not going to be in their service area. So you can bypass their objections and still do something. So again, rather than saying no to everything, let's look at a different approach to achieve the same outcome, which is, I think everybody wants parking back there. The question is, how do we do it?
And
Not how do we,
yeah, Mr. Conley, I think you're 100% on point there, which it's counter to the previous message, right? That all we can do is there's limited things because we can't seek access. But what I just heard you say, which I think is a fabulous idea, is there might be some land for sale up there currently. And also we know there are at least two large land property owners up at the top that are just holding that land. And we know who they are, and they might have an interest as well. And I think there might be a municipal right of way up there. There might actually be a section up there. If my memory serves, it's either that or the school district. Somebody has some land that's outside of what's owned by the sections that were sold off by Miss Stewart. And so those are creative ideas that I think would help create the perception of balance.
and one other mention I'd like to make, Representative Johnson was talking about the number of vehicles using Canyon Road versus number of residents using Canyon Road. Beyond Echo, there's, I think, 5 houses, 5. And there are, on a nice day, over 150, 200 cars back there. We've counted them. So I don't know what the math is exactly, but it's less than half a percentage point of the people living back there actually utilizing the road. So I do think it is in the best interest of the residents of Anchorage, not just the 5 people that live back there, to have that road improved, especially, and I'd like to remind everybody, especially because Chugach State Park is planning on building a parking lot there. They're going to do it. You know, they're trying to get funding from at least 3 different sources on their side. So if we don't do anything with the road, there's going to be a paved parking lot with signs, toilets, paid parking meters, like the whole thing. And we're going to have this terrible road leading right to it. So this is our opportunity to improve the road, and hopefully it all works out so that the parking lot and the road happen hopefully within a year of each other, maybe 2 years. We can't predict exactly how long the process is going to take for either of them. But if we just say no, we're going to be right back here in a couple years, maybe new assembly people, and we're going to be talking about, well, why didn't we do the road then? We talked about it. Now we have this parking lot. We have even more traffic, and we have this road that people are getting stuck on and crashing into each other on, et cetera. And we had the opportunity and we didn't do anything for it.
Ms. Braga.
I just wanted to echo that there is significant traffic from people using trailheads, and on Campbell Airstrip Road, I was just doing a mental count and I couldn't have missed some, but there are 7 trailheads that I know of. And, you know, the people utilizing those trailheads far surpasses the residents that are at the top of the road. So it is impact on their road system for sure.
I'd just like to add one more thing about that. In the experience that I've had talking to the different service area people, different residents that live at the end of these roads, surprisingly, you'd be surprised, most of the people back there actually support the park. There's a couple people who are kind of loud and obnoxious and make themselves heard, but most people on these roads actually legitimately support the park, and they want to see the road improved, not just for the benefit of their ride home, but also to bring the park traffic into the park into a safer, more manageable place so that they don't have it in front of their house, 50 vehicles parked right in front. And so that they don't have people leaving litter right in their yards. They have their own interests and they have the public's interest. And nobody's really put up that much of a fight against it. Maybe the Stewart Homestead Trail people, but I think there's a creative solution around that.
Yeah, and I don't know that anybody objected specifically to the Canyon Road project. I think it's the mix that is what's important to think about. If there are 8 projects there, one of them looks like it's not a road project, and that's the parking for Basher. And so I think that's really the issue. It's very little to do with any one specific one. It's the mix.
I think the Basher thing is on municipal lands. That should be an easy one. That needs parking for sure. So that, I feel like that's a good example. That's a good example of what you could do with Stewart Homestead Trail. Use municipal land to increase parking for Chugach State Park. The key is just getting people into the park. That's what we're trying to do. However that needs to happen. And on Basher, you got municipal land. on Stewart Homestead Trail area, you have both private and municipal land you could utilize, but we need the funding to do that. And it's not on here, the Stewart Homestead Trail, land purchase, because we haven't even explored that, but I think it's something that should be explored.
All right. I don't have anyone else in the queue. Anyone? Mr. Volland?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know if this is your intent, and I'm not going to get too far afield here, but I think you're making a very excellent point about how low housing density in these parts of Anchorage, due to zoning and other factors, makes maintenance of infrastructure very expensive. So something for us all to be thinking about. More germane to this conversation, I just want to read the language of the proposition that we put before voters with AO number 2023-8. It said, creation of a service area would allow the municipality to submit to voters bond propositions for projects that support access to portions of Chugach State Park that are located in the service area and ameliorate the neighborhood effects of access by park users. Projects could include road and parking improvements, park access, and park access supporting amenities. And so I think, to the chair's point, like, that's what I'm not seeing here with this list of projects, is that mix. And this is what voters approved. And so I just would encourage us to take a look. And I think zooming out of just the Stewart Trail, for me, it's just a broader philosophical approach about the importance of public access to things that belong to the public. So whether it's Stewart Trail, but even zooming out from CASA, whether it's Campbell Lake or the Ram Valley Trail or the Fish Creek connection to Coastal Trail. I guess what I'm passionate about and what I want to be supportive is creating access, creating amenities, creating things that support use of these public assets that we have. And so I love your idea about the Stewart Trail, but for me, it just can't be all just roads upgrades. I do want to see more of a blend there that's more consistent with the language that we put before voters.
Mr. Conley?
Will you add that to our list? Will you support that? Because we need somebody to do it. And as the Glen Ellis Road service area, I can't just say, hey, we want to buy some land over by Stewart.
Fair.
As the road service area in the Stewart area, I'm not sure which one it is. If it's not part of their service area, that vacant land, they can't do it. So the folks that would do that would be potentially assembly members or community council members. It's kind of open-ended. Somebody needs to propose it and somebody needs to sponsor it.
So
If you sponsor it, we can add it to this list.
Yeah.
And, but it needs to be explored. You need to look at the cost of things. You need to see which land is available, et cetera,
Mr.
et cetera.
Connolly,
Somebody has to do
you
that.
raise a good question that you're probably well positioned to answer, and that is, what was the process by which these were generated as a list?
So Roger and I reached out to some of the other service areas. We asked them, what things would you like to see done? Basher said, we want more parking. The Bear Valley said, we don't really have parking in our service area, but the roads leading to the park need attention. Upper O'Malley has parking. It has Prospect Heights. Chugach State Park maintains that, and they've done a pretty good job with Prospect Heights. I think that's on the list for improvements again next year or the year after, if I recall. Could be wrong, but and then there's us, and we're working on the Canyon Road thing. But anybody can submit a request for an improvement. But again, if it's in the state park, like we don't do state park parking lot building.
Right. So I think you provide a very important lens to why this list is what it is. Right. You said that you did outreach, and it's great. I'm not trying to smear your efforts. I'm very glad you've done this work. But for like our alcohol tax expenditures, we are looking at a comprehensive method of coming up with proposals that does outreach, and it actually gets a sample of what people want, more than just the people that we know, or more than just the people with one set of interests like homelessness. Instead, we also want to do some prevention work. And so if you port that question to here, and we have a number of other areas, the marijuana tax, we set up a board that is going to provide to us a list, and the board will be very generally populated by people with different perspectives. And so if this list was generated by outreach to service area people, then it is representative of service area interests and not necessarily a broader interest. And so that speaks to looking forward to the CASA effort, that we figure out a way to have a more broad-based set of inputs so that you aren't in a weird conflicted spot, like you just said, suggesting, well, on what basis would I say put a project in Golden View because I live over here, right? And other than the basis that you're a member of the broader service area, I can see the potential conflict there, why it makes it very uncomfortable, because what if then Golden View does that to you and it's not what you want? And so it certainly raises the question of coming up with a system for doing this that helps you, that you're a part of, and that has a more broad perspective. It's very interesting. I'm surprised we didn't think about it before. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's also envisioned that this is not going to be a one-time thing.
Right.
That there'll be bond propositions in subsequent years. This is sort of just the first run through of where the most significant needs are. And again, who knows what the most money you can win a vote on. We kind of thought 10 million, if you start stacking more projects on, you may increase the risk that the vote fails.
Yeah, that's always a concern. And this year, I think there will be a number of substantial asks going to the voters. And so you just never know. It's like the lottery. Mr. Connolly.
And I think when we talked about this at the very, very, very beginning, Roger and I and a few other folks, I think Suzanne, when we first brought this whole thing to the table, we didn't, like what Roger just said, we didn't want to have 50 projects on this list. And we wanted to hit the ones that had the most immediate impact, that were getting the most attention, the areas that had the most attention. And me personally, like I'm in this capacity, both as a road service area person, but also as just a private citizen. So as a road service person, I'm advocating for Canyon Road. As a private citizen, I would love to see Stewart Homestead Trail developed. I'm with you, Mr. Vaughn. I would love to see that. And I think that that's a really good next move for phase 2. I think this is phase 1. I think we do this, make some good progress, and then the following year, we figure out what we need to do to make Stewart Homestead access legal, physically possible based on the landscape. Like the hill is really steep up there. So where do we put this? How do we make a parking lot? How do we make it work from a physical standpoint? And then we focus on that, because that's going to be more expensive than these two to do everything between the land purchase. If we do buy something further down the road, we're going to have to make Stewart Homestead Trail a road if we're going to build inwards. If we're going to buy land further into that road, you have to improve that road, because right now it's kind of just, you could put a car on it, but it's not a road. And there's really no room to put a parking lot in the neighborhood there, because there's houses bordering it. So I think there's a lot more work that needs to be done. I don't think that this excludes Stewart Homestead Trail. It doesn't include it, but it's not excluding it. It's not saying, no, we don't want that. And I still think there's a path forward, but I think it takes more time to do it correctly. And in the meantime, we should do this and then work on the other thing over the next year. And I'll do that in my own personal time, not as a road service member, but just a volunteer, essentially. Like I'm very much in favor of moving that forward.
Other members? Go ahead, Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, I just want to just highlight again what Roger said there, and that we envision this as being sort of an ongoing process, right? If we think about something like a school bond, it may include improvements for certain schools and not others. It doesn't mean that we're not going to concern ourselves with those necessary improvements somewhere down the road. I don't think this is meant to be exclude other projects that have merit. I think this is merely a starting point. So I think that's an important consideration. Not to say that this has to be the absolute final version of this, but we don't have to imagine that this is as far as we ever go with the CASA bonding and anything else that might be undertaken in the broad scheme of things. So I think that's just an important point to keep in mind if we're talking about how we prioritize our efforts.
I'd just like to add, if this works out, I would love to see a vote go to Eagle River. And we intentionally did not include Eagle River because we didn't want them to vote no. No offense to Eagle River people. But I would love to see this go to the Eagle River people after they see what we do. And then they say, oh, this would be kind of nice. And then Ram Valley, Holy Grail, love to see that as well fall under this framework. But I think we need to demonstrate it with something that's a little less controversial. And Canyon Road, I don't think it's very controversial. I think everybody wants to see a parking lot back there. They want to see improved road. The other couple of small areas, Basher and Upper O'Malley and Bear Valley, not very controversial. I think we can get these things done, demonstrate that it works, go to Eagle River folks, push for Stewart Homestead Trail. And if we had those done, I don't really see very much else in the Anchorage Bowl that's really, really critical. Those are I think the most critical things for Chugach State Park access. But we might be able to find new ones too. So I don't want to say no to other ideas, but I think if we had addressed Stewart, Canyon, Ram Valley, I think a lot of people would be pretty happy about that. And this can do that.
Yeah, we still have to overcome the hurdle of Eagle River because it's a dual yes vote on the actual projects.
That's why we're not doing it from the beginning, just so that we don't.
No, and for the creation of the service area didn't vote, but these will require their vote.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's the dual yes is service area people and the entire municipality. Everyone from Portage to Eklutna has to say yes by majority. Not everyone, but Ms. Braga.
Well, I would just say this Bear Valley one is troubling because literally there's no parking there. So I think there's 4 spots where you go up McHugh Peak from the top of, I don't know if it's Honey Bear there. There used to be gates that.
There is
Yeah.
overflow. You can park just down the road.
Yeah, it's
on the
quite
side. They actually have it signed now that it's Chugach State Park overflow off of Honey Bear.
Okay.
There's an area that's cleared. So it's not technically like deeded parking, but it has been
Mhm.
used and approved and maintained for parking, and people are using it. I've parked there a few times when the 4 spots are full, because obviously 4 is not enough for normal traffic flow up there.
So that presents more traffic when everyone goes up to see if one of the 4 spots is open. Same with at the top of Basher. It's Mount Aletha's Mountain Road. There's 4 spots, and everybody goes into that small circle, looks to see if one of the 4 spots is open. Then they drive a mile down the road and park. So it seems like we could somehow figure out a way to know that there's no parking, but I don't know how to do that. But
I think we just need to buy land over there under the flag of the municipality using this program and put parking in there that's not technically in Chugach State Park, but since it borders it, directly accesses it, and then we achieve the same goal in a legal, easy way.
Anyone else? Bill, any cap? No,
One other question.
go ahead.
So
Ms. Mullen.
I guess, can we define access improvements? So in Exhibit A, like the road improvements, that is pretty self-explanatory, but what do we mean by access improvements on Honey Bear, Snow Bear, and Kingsway, and then near Steamboat Drive and the Stewart Homestead Trail?
To the chair, I think, so you're looking at the Exhibit A that was originally submitted with the first version of this ordinance? Is that right? This is the back of this handout. So by way of reminder, in April, before she left the body, then Chair LaFrance introduced this placeholder ordinance, which said, as a WAG, here's a $10 million bond proposition with lots of blanks, fill it in later. That's the step we're at now. So I think all of these project descriptions have been updated with the proposal that you're seeing on the board.
So I guess I would just even respond that the placeholder doesn't feel consistent. Do you know what I'm saying? Like this mix is more in line with what was on the ballot before voters. So that's interesting. Thanks.
So, go ahead, Bill.
And since the chair invited me to do a capstone, I guess I'll say procedurally, for this to go to voters, typically it has to be wrapped up by January. So there's a little bit more time between now and then to tinker with it. And it was set for public hearing and then delayed. I think we're still in that loop now, so it's going to come back before the body, but there's still time for more conversation and tinkering.
So yes, but since Mr. Thurn is in the room, I received a communication from bond counsel through the CFO, and I can share it with the members, where she reiterated that we have to be sensitive to the timelines of the process that bond counsel requires to vet projects, because if we just throw projects out there and they aren't properly vetted in advance, when they go to sell the bonds, they won't be able to give it an unqualified rating, meaning it will not likely find a buyer or be more problematic. And so we have begun a process internally where we are shifting forward by several months the CIP process. In fact, we passed an ordinance just before the 120-day memo requiring the administration to provide to us a list of their CIP projects they intend for the bonds, so that we can now already have that conversation going on. And so I think that bond counsel would tell us that December is probably too late to hand them a pile of projects to review and prepare for the kind of final action in January. And so November is probably the sweet spot for any action, getting them a project that isn't fully detailed. And that's just a wag on my part, November. They probably will say no sooner, because they always want it sooner. But practically speaking, somewhere between where we have been in the past and where we are today is a deadline that is outside of our control. And so don't count on January for bond issues. Otherwise, you will be sorely let down. And maybe, actually, Bill, since you're here, I will connect you with Cynthia, bond counsel, and you can have an attorney to attorney conversation to plumb the depths of what that actually means from a practical perspective, because since you're on this project, it seems germane. Okay, anyone else? Thank you. And again, sorry for the grilling. There's just a difference of what we thought was coming compared to the original and what we want to see happen. But we are experts at always not getting what we want and then trying to figure out how to make it work. And so your efforts are
Chair Thompson.
honored. Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Sullivan.
Yeah, real quick, just to wrap up, I think the only signers on this so far are Mr. Johnson and myself, so we could always use a third. And I saw some maybe people that might want to jump in this. We're starting early to hopefully alleviate some of the issues that you're bringing up. Again, I mentioned earlier that Public Works has brought forward that we maybe want to phase these projects to do an engineering study to get better estimates going forward. So looking forward to getting that feedback. And then I think as far as defining the projects, I think broader is probably better than making a narrow definition. So we can just use the funds for a wider variety of projects versus painting ourselves into a corner, which I think some of the members feel that we are right now, painting ourselves in just road projects. Thank you.
Yeah, there's definitely a dilemma there. Not enough specificity, and then a rogue administration does what it wants. Too much specificity, and you're tied in knots. And so somewhere between those two poles is a good place to be. Mr. Connolly?
And just to respond to your last message, I'd just like to emphasize again, it's phase one. So I know it's not what you wanted to see. I know we wanted to cover every possible scenario in the Anchorage Bowl to improve access, but I don't think we can without spending more like 20 million or 25 million. So I think, what you said was totally true. I'd like to see everything taken care of in one push, but I think a more practical approach is phase one, phase two, maybe even phase 3 and 4. But it's going to take some time and a little more effort and help from Assembly and other organizations in the community that are having vested interest in seeing that improvement. I know I can't do it alone as a private citizen, and I can't do it alone as a road service area member for Glen Alps, especially for Stewart Homestead Trail. But we need a lot more help for these other things. But I feel like we're doing pretty good on the things that we can impact so far.
Right, and thank you for sure. The other thing we didn't talk about is that the service area could in fact propose tax levy for specific projects. There are other creative ways, but all of that depends on what the project is, where it's going. And that would not have the same restrictions as a bond, but it would also not have the same opportunity for leverage because bonds are a substantial payment up front, but the taxes are collected over time. And so you can't leverage them in the same way. Anyhow, so this conversation it's interesting and good, and there's a lot of good to be done. I don't know that anybody expected we would get it all in once. None of us who've been around for long would believe that could have been how people are thinking about it. But we also, like the alcohol tax, if we aren't careful, are going to spend it all on the one thing and commit to that. So it's there every year. And then all those other things are going to get left behind. And so we always fight over those things. If fight isn't maybe the right word, but stretch and pull over those things to make sure that the equitable balance happens as early as possible. Otherwise, it becomes foregone conclusion that it will be one thing. So it's all very interesting. Thank you for this effort. I will assume we're going to hear from Bill sometime in the near future back from bond counsel, which will give us a timeline, which can then make the project have it bound and anything else? Go ahead if you want. It's an open project.
So Randy, I'd love to be the third on this.
All right. So you guys talk amongst yourselves. Anyone else? Okay, then we are adjourned.